Chapter 3. So we learned one time warp lesson. If you mix the book with the takeout menu, you become the barbecue. Which brings us back to the grassy plains of outer Mongolia. Two bands of angry-looking horsemen were bearing down on us from opposite directions, and there was no place to hide for miles. Looking this way and that, Fred, Sam, and I stumbled backward into each other. Things were not looking good. Just then, a black shadow fell over us. We looked up and saw a giant black stallion rearing up, his rider towering high on his back. The stallion's huge body blocked out the sun as the beast let out a snort. I knew we were all wondering the same thing. Was the Time Warp Trio about to become Time Warp Toast? Above the sounds of battle, we heard a voice yell, "Come on!" A hand reached down and lifted Fred, Sam, and me up onto the back of the huge stallion. We got a good look at the rider, who was now only inches away. He was dressed in some sort of Mongolian battle armor and helmet, but he couldn't have been much older than us. "Choo!" our rider friend yelled. I was about to say Gesundheit when I realized it must be some sort of command for his horse. The stallion rocketed forward, hurtling us out of the way just as the two armies of horsemen collided, right in the spot where we'd been standing only moments ago. We'd escaped by seconds. Now that's what I call some fancy hoof work. We had warped right into the middle of a huge fight between two warring tribes. Arrows whizzed overhead. Metal swords clanged against metal swords. These guys meant business. This was a serious grudge match. Warriors on horseback dodged in and out of the fighting. They fired arrows, swung swords, and turned circles without even having to hold on to their horses. Horsemen fought horsemen. Tribe fought tribe. We were in the middle of a real Mongolian beef, and it looked like we were going to be the next ones to be served. Chapter 4. The rider pulled his stallion off into a safe spot behind some boulders. We all dismounted, glad to be alive. "All right," Fred shouted, slapping the rider on the back. "We owe you, man." That didn't go over too well. In a flash, our new pal drew a very sharp-looking sword from his belt and shoved it in Fred's face. "No one strikes a prince of the Borjagrid," he said. A prince? We all stared at the guy. He was just a kid, though he was dressed in some pretty fancy battle gear. Hanging out with a real live Mongolian prince would be pretty cool. Too bad Fred already made him angry. Sunlight glinted off the razor-sharp sword. Sam leaned toward me. "That's a scimitar," he whispered. "It's a curved Asian sword with—" "I don't care what it is," I said. If we didn't turn on the charm, we were going to have a fillet of Fred on our hands. "Please excuse Fred's manners," I said to the prince. "He was raised by wolves." "Is this true?" the prince asked with new interest. "I myself am descended from the great wolf and was born with a destiny from heaven on high." "Oh, yeah?" Fred replied. "Well, I'm in the Little League." You had to admire Fred's ability to forget he had a scimitar in his face only seconds ago. The prince narrowed his eyes at Fred. "Really?" he said. "And you can ride two horses at once?" "Who can't?" said Fred. It was time to raise the stakes. "Can you do this?" Fred stuck his hand in his armpit and gave the prince his best armpit fart. I guess armpit farts aren't big in ancient Mongolia because the prince flapped his arms like a sick pigeon and let out a pathetic little squeak. "I will work on it," he told Fred. He seemed serious. Since we'd already survived near-death warfare and battle by armpit, I figured it was time for introductions. So I said, "My name's Joe. This is Fred, and that's Sam. We're from the land of Brooklyn." I stuck out my hand to the prince. He looked at me like I was nuts. Then he started sniffing it, just like the nomad had sniffed at Fred before. To get the point across, I grabbed the prince's hand and started to shake it. It's called a handshake, I explained. It's a symbol of friendship. No sniffing? He asked. You are strange. But I guess he understood because he shook Fred and Sam's hands, too. Then he introduced himself. I am Temujin, he said. Temujin, huh? Sam said. Funny, that sounds sort of familiar. Oh, you have no doubt heard of me, Temujin replied. My father, Yesegwe, is chieftain of our tribe. Look there. Temujin leaped up onto a boulder and pointed down to one of the biggest, baddest warriors on the battlefield, his pops. See how he leads his army into battle against the Tartar demons? Temujin added proudly. He is the bravest man in all of Mongolia. Tartars and Mongols battling, said Sam. This must be the 12th century, if I remember what was in my history books. Which reminded me, speaking of books, I said to Temujin, have you seen a blue book with a silver squiggle thing on the cover? Book? Temujin asked. Judging from the look on TJ's face, books weren't big in his world. It's sort of a box about this big, I said, showing him the size with my hands. That sounds familiar, Temujin said. Yes, I believe I have seen it. Great, Sam squealed. This is too easy. Where? Temujin thought for a moment. Let me think. Was it? No, perhaps in the... No, it wasn't there. Come on, said Fred. You couldn't miss it. It's the only thing around here that isn't a sheep. Maybe you left it in your yurt, I said. It was somewhere in our camp, Temujin said. Perhaps I will see it tonight at the victory feast. You will come as my guest. Victory feast? I asked. The battle was still raging on below us, with no end in sight. How do you know your dad is going to win? TJ gave us a big grin. We always win, he said. We are Borjigid. Chapter 5.